morning, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and today another very detailed forecast update coming your way. We're going to recap on the severe thunderstorms that blew through the southeastern corner and the central corners of Queensland yesterday. We're also going to talk about a severe thunderstorm outbreak potential for later on this weekend. We'll also talk about another one expected towards the end of next week. It's all going to be happening across the southeast of Queensland. I'll give a tropical weather update as well as usual, and we'll also talk about some heatwave-like conditions expected to extend across parts of WA. All of that plus more coming up in today's weather forecast. If you are brand new to the channel, please consider subscribing. The support lately has been much appreciated. But let's get stuck straight into things over the southeast of Queensland. And I would like to begin today's forecast just by recapping on what happened last night. So first off, we did have a round of powerful thunderstorms developing at around midday local time around the Taroom up towards the Tambo sort of area, and then a batch of thunderstorms developing outside of Chinchilla in the early afternoon hours. Now these thunderstorms rapidly grew up into big supercell thunderstorms, and we did have hook echoes on the radar. Take a look at this on the image that I'm showing up on screen right now. This was outside of Inju, north of Roma, at about 3 or 4 p.m. last night. The timestamps are highlighted. You can see that these thunderstorms rapidly blew up on this imagery as well with the radar imagery. They rapidly blew up into what eventually became a very powerful squall line heading in towards the central Queensland area. And unfortunately, we didn't have grand radar data because the Rockhampton radar was looking into a mountain range. So unfortunately, the radar data for this weather event was very hit and miss, and places extending between a line of Emerald across to Billawheeler and then even down towards the Sunshine Coast got much stronger storms than what they were looking at on radar. The squall line was a lot powerful than what people were expecting, just based off how weak the radar in Rockhampton and the Bundaberg radars were, and they just weren't able to see the storms for what they actually were worth. So these storms were actually very powerful, very strong indeed. Some significant rainfall observations were also reported, up towards 80 millimeters outside of Eddersvoort. That was about as much rainfall as we did expect on the forecast here, and it was much more widespread than I initially expected as well. A lot of locations picked up at least 10 millimeters of rainfall, and quite a few locations copped a very healthy 25 millimeters or more. A few spots around the Billawheeler area picked up 50 millimeters or more, and like I said, those higher observations of around 80 millimeters were reported around Billawheeler. This storm front impacting the Agnes Water and Gladstone area by around 8 p.m, and then into Rockhampton and Bundaberg by around 9 p.m, but the storm front was substantially weaker by that time. And now down towards the Sunshine Coast, Caloundra received a very powerful thunderstorm at around, I believe it was about 5 p.m. Local time, or maybe just after. A very powerful supercell thunderstorm blew through the area south of Maroochydore around the Caloundra area. Very strong indeed. Rainfall accumulations were 61 millimeters in just 20 minutes. Huge amounts of rainfall were reported there. Large hailstones, damaging winds, and there were a couple of reports of funnel clouds in the air. It was a very powerful thunderstorm at that. Certainly one of the stronger ones that we did see last night. Now, thankfully, the all-out thunderstorm outbreak that we were expecting in southeastern Queensland didn't really eventuate. However, some really powerful storms were still detected on radar at around 9 or 10 p.m. local time. Take a look at this one outside of Clifton. Now, this was the stuff that we were worried about last night. These were the cells. You can't really see it on this radar imagery because it is a much more low resolution version because it's an archive, but this was a hook echo, a very powerful supercell thunderstorm just outside of the Clifton area, west of Warwick, southwest of Toowoomba, and southwest of Gatton. A very powerful storm cell, and what we were worried about was storm cells like this firing up everywhere along the southeastern corner of Queensland, up through Dalby, Chinchilla, Kingaroy, even north up towards Gympie. Thankfully, these storms that were very powerful, they did eventuate, but they were a little bit further inland, and the storm cells moving through the Brisbane and the Gold Coast area didn't really come into fruition, not until much later in the night when a couple of storm cells moved through the northern Brisbane suburbs at around midnight or 1 a.m. But again, the storms were much weaker than anticipated around the Brisbane and the Gold Coast area. But further inland, you will be able to back me up on this. Some very powerful storm cells were reported, and like I said, that one outside of Clifton really did stand out to me. The conditions certainly were there. It just looked a little bit too late in the night for these thunderstorms to fire up and make the most of the convective available potential energy. Still, though, some really nasty storm cells were reported. And it was much better to be safer than sorry with those warnings there. The Bureau of Meteorology really did miss out on this one. I mean, calling for a shower or two for Brisbane and the Gold Coast and the outer suburbs out towards Toowoomba, calling for a possible shower or something further up the Sunshine Coast. I mean, that was never going to be a good forecast, and it certainly was a million times worse than that for some of these locations. And those storms outside of Caloundra were very dangerous indeed. That was a very powerful thunderstorm moving through the Caloundra area, and even some of the storms outside of the Billawheeler and the Dingo area were much more powerful than what the Bureau of Meteorology was suggesting. So unfortunately, they did really miss out on that forecast there. I think the forecast that we gave on this channel was pretty good. It might have been a little bit excessive, some of the terminologies, especially into the southeast of Queensland, but in general, for the central parts of Queensland outside of Rockhampton and into the Capricornia districts, it was a very good forecast, and it did eventuate pretty much exactly how it was expected to, which is fantastic news. Again, these forecast models very rarely miss, which is great to see. Now, we do have a couple of days of calmer conditions for the southeast of Queensland. A few showers still expected along the coast of the northeast of New South Wales, and showers extending up the Queensland coastline tomorrow morning into the early afternoon hours. Mackay, a possible shower or two tomorrow evening and into Sunday morning, before some rain slowly develops out of a low pressure trough expected to move across central parts of Queensland outside of the Charleville and Roma area on Sunday night and into early Monday morning. This will turn into a widespread thunderstorm situation on Monday afternoon. You can see showers and storms developing between a line of Longreach down towards Coffs Harbour in the northeast of New South Wales, with showers and storms pretty persistent around the Roma, Injune and Taroom sort of area in Queensland's sort of thunderstorm alley, if you'd like. Now, these thunderstorms here do have a shot of going severe, especially Monday afternoon outside of the Tambo and Injune sort of area, this general area towards the southwest of Rolleston. There is a chance of some severe thunderstorms and into the afternoon hours of Monday. Certainly up towards Rolleston as well, there will be some good severe thunderstorms possible. Outside of Chinchilla, a severe thunderstorm is also possible, or a couple of severe thunderstorms, and severe thunderstorms also look likely into the northeast of New South Wales. These are going to be just those stock standard severe thunderstorms with isolated pockets of heavy rainfall, large hailstones and damaging winds. There's certainly not going to be a widespread severe thunderstorm outbreak. There's just going to be a couple of really heavy thunderstorms here and there, mixed in with a few more isolated and more weaker pulse thunderstorms outside of, say, Charleville down towards St. George and Roma, that sort of area. I reckon the thunderstorms will be substantially weaker down in those locations. This is more of a heads up. We'll have much more detail on this weather forecast in the coming couple of days. It is a relatively new addition as well, so I do believe the forecast models have a chance of increasing the intensity of this thunderstorm outbreak, and conditions do look pretty good for a thunderstorm outbreak as well. Still not as good as what we did have last night, but there's still going to be a lot of energy in the environment. Convective available potential energy values will be at that moderate to high sort of mark, especially around that Injune to Roma sort of area, and then into the southeast of Queensland. Those values are going to be quite high as well, especially into later Monday night, so I wouldn't be surprised if a few cells fired up around the Brisbane and the Gold Coast area. But at this time, severe thunderstorms directly impacting the Brisbane Metro or the Gold Coast area, or even up into the Sunshine Coast on Monday afternoon, look more unlikely than they do look likely. A couple of thunderstorms also possible Tuesday afternoon, showers continuing into early Wednesday morning for parts of the south east of Queensland, and a few showers and storms expected Wednesday afternoon between Rockhampton and Bundaberg. Later on into the forecast period, we have another thunderstorm outbreak expected to begin on Thursday afternoon to round out October as a low pressure system slowly develops across central parts of Queensland and New South Wales. Nothing crazy expected on Thursday, but it looks like a couple of good storms are possible Friday afternoon as this low pressure trough extends down the Queensland coastline, wrapping around a high pressure area in the Tasman Sea and a low pressure area across in Queensland. Some pretty unstable weather is expected to eventuate for the first day of November, Friday, around the southeastern corner of Queensland, and that could result in some substantial rainfall observations. Again, we will keep a close eye out on the forecast here. Things can and will change on this forecast, especially considering it's still a week away, but it certainly looks like a few good showers and maybe a storm or two are expected on Friday and even in towards early Saturday morning next week. So we will keep a very close eye on this forecast. It certainly looks like it's going to be pretty unstable across the southeast of Queensland all next week and into next weekend. You might have noticed as well, just considering how zoomed out this map is, that there's not an awful lot expected up into the far north of Queensland as well, and we will lead now into our tropical weather update. There isn't too much to be talking about in regards to the tropics. This monsoon trough slowly becoming a little bit more persistent, just day on day. It is slowly building, typical for this time of the year, but the rainfall is still refusing to pipe up at this time. A couple of good showers look to be on the forecast for parts of the far north of Queensland, but still a drop in the ocean compared to the rainfall that they do probably need at this point, especially out towards the Atherton tablelands where they are on water restrictions at this time. But some good showers still look to be possible into the Daintree rainforest, and a couple of drops are also expected down on the Cassowary coast as well. Rainfall expected across the extreme top end of the Cape York Peninsula up towards Thursday Island over the next 10 days, especially later on into next week. Some good falls are possible there, up towards 25 millimetres across some of those days. Rainfall as well being pretty persistent over the Northern Territory, and this is just from evening thunderstorms, pretty much exclusively for the Northern Territory. Storms expected tonight. They're also possible tomorrow night, but it looks like tomorrow night and Sunday night will be a little bit calmer. Monday, still some storms expected on north of Kakadu and into the top end of the Northern Territory. A couple of storms possible on Tuesday, a dry day on Wednesday, and then a bit of a thunderstorm outbreak expected Thursday and Friday next week, and continuing in towards Saturday and Sunday as well. Thunderstorms expected across the northern parts of the Northern Territory, pretty persistently throughout the end of next week. And this is all being built up by a lot of instability, which we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes with our heatwave forecast for WA and the Northern Territory. But this rainfall here really now starting to pipe up quite well, and it's not going to be far until the real rains of the wet season do start to continue to build. Typically this time of the year we start to see a drop in rainfall across PNG, and that has already started to occur. We're starting to see lesser rainfall accumulations there as this monsoon trough heads further south and slowly builds across the northern parts of Australia. And I reckon it's only a month until we start to see our first burst in the monsoon trough, where we do see that incredible rainfall really do pipe up across parts of northern Queensland and into the Northern Territory. But again, we might have to be waiting a little bit longer than that. We will have to wait and see. But the rainfall really can't come soon enough for some of these locations that are already starting to receive drought-like conditions, especially across the northern parts of the Northern Territory, where soil moisture values are really low. Northern parts of Queensland, rather, those soil moisture values are really low outside of Cairns. Cairns itself at 20%, that's not too bad for this time of the year. The Cassowary Coast still sitting at about 60 to 70%, but they do really need some rainfall up there, there's no doubt about it. Some good falls are possible towards the end of next week, but they're not going to be enough to quench drought-like conditions now extending outside of Atherton, Ravenshoe, and up towards Mount Carbine. Some good soil moisture observations are still around the Daintree rainforest. We're not too concerned about that, but unfortunately this rainfall really can't come soon enough for parts of Queensland and the Northern Territory, and it's not going to be long until they are experiencing drought-like conditions over some expanses of the NT and into WA, especially considering it is a La Nina year and we are expecting an early rainfall onset. So it is a bit of a surprise that we're not seeing more rainfall on the forecast this time, but at this time the rainfall season is playing out exactly as the forecast was suggesting, so we can't be too concerned considering there's no real difference to the forecast at this time. Now, in terms of instability that we're going to be talking about promoting those thunderstorms across WA and the Northern Territory, well, that is being promoted by a heat wave that is forecast to develop across WA into the early parts of this week, next week rather. Now, heat wave, that is extreme terminology to use across WA, especially considering a hot day is considered to be 45 up there, but we are expecting temperatures to exceed 45 degrees and head into the mid to high 40s for the first time this summer outside of Marble Bar, Port Hedland and Roebuck. We're also expecting very warm days to extend down the WA coastline, and I'll show you what I'm talking about right now. It's going to be slightly cooler today for the southwest corner, but that's nothing in comparison to what we're expecting next Monday. A top of 31 expected for Perth, high 30s for parts of the northern Wheatbelt into the Murchison region, Gascoyne expecting into the low to mid 40s, and then low to mid 40s for parts of the Pilbara and into the Kimberley region, up towards 44 outside of Kuakara, 43 for Fitzroy Crossing, 32 for Broome, but it is going to get a lot warmer than that. You can see next Tuesday temperatures once again into the the low to mid 40s. Marble Bar expecting a top of 42, Perth going up to a very warm top of 34 next Tuesday, and that is pretty much set in stone at this time. The forecast looks really certain about that, so our first real run of hot weather looks to begin to develop from Tuesday. It's going to be warm across the north as well. Up into the northern suburbs of Perth, some very warm temperatures are expected. Wednesday we might get saved by a sea breeze by the looks of things, just considering this forecast here, but still temperatures expected to rise into the mid 30s for the, again, one of the first times this summer. Thursday is going to be really warm as well. Bureau of Meteorology already suggesting a top into the high 30s and early 40s for parts of the northern suburbs around Perth. The Eastern Relief forecast model suggesting a top of 36 for Perth, so very warm indeed through there, and into the early 40s for the some of the northern towns into the Wheatbelt, and then mid 40s for parts of the Gascoyne and into the Pilbara region, high 40s outside of Marble Bar and Pilbara. We're going to be seeing some pretty warm days through there. And then for the first day of November, we're expecting temperatures to rise up towards 45 outside of, I believe, 80 Mile Beaches up here. Broome expecting a warm top as well, or outside of Broome at least expecting a warm top, and then down into the Wheatbelt as well. Very warm temperatures up towards 42, 43 degrees for a wide expanse of the central Wheatbelt, and then into the eastern Wheatbelt as well to round out next week. And then for next weekend, a cold front sweeps through and moves all of this warm heat into the eastern half of WA and then in towards South Australia and the Northern Territory for next Sunday. It is going to get very warm across central parts of Australia. not as warm as what the forecast was suggesting yesterday, but we're still talking about days up towards 46 degrees Celsius, so very warm indeed, even for this time of the year. We're talking about temperatures about 6 to 10 degrees Celsius above average, and then for Perth, temperatures about 14 degrees Celsius above average. And that October record of, I believe, 40.4 degrees might get threatened by next Thursday. Again, that is a huge jump for the forecast at this time to move from 37 to 40, but I reckon the October heat record for Perth might be in a little bit of trouble. It could be broken by the end of next week. Very warm indeed across Western Australia, very wet across parts of Queensland overnight, and with some more rain and storms expected, the weather scene remains very interesting across Australia, and a lot to continue to be talking about over the next 10 days. So if you aren't subscribed, please do consider subscribing. I thank everyone for the recent support on the channel. We've made a massive push to get through 20,000 subscribers, so the support has been heartwarming to see. But that is all from me today. A special shout out to the channel sponsors. Their names are on screen right now, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.